All right, in this video I wanted to walk through an infographic I made about 3 related upper respiratory tract infections. So let's think about what these infections have in common. So the first one I want to talk about is rhinitis, which is just the common cold. So the common cold is a viral infection of the nose, and it's caused by around 200 different types of viruses. Some rhinoviruses and some coronaviruses. And the common cold has no cure, and this virus can survive outside the body for hours, which makes it pretty easy to transmit to people. But I wanted to think about, well, why does rhinitis cause the major symptoms we get when we have the cold, which is a runny nose and maybe a postnasal drip? And I just really wanted to point out that the key here, why rhinitis gives us those symptoms, is inflammation. Specifically, it's inflammation of the membranes inside our nose. So the virus gets in there, it infects those cells, it reproduces. Viral reproduction kills the cells that the virus is reproducing inside of. Now we've got dead cells, so that's tissue damage. Our body's response to tissue damage every single time is inflammation. Inflammation includes that vasodilation and then the increased permeability of our vasculature. That is so that white blood cells can get into the tissue and kill the virus. But by doing that, we also allow fluid to leak out of the vasculature. And that leakage gives us the runny nose and the postnasal drip that we see. Let's see. So, rhinitis, right? Again, infection of the nose, we get a runny nose. It's a pretty straightforward infection, right? I think if we know these details, it can explain a couple other things. For example, the fact that there are 200 viruses that can cause the cold explains why we get colds so often, right? If I get a cold, I build immunity to it, but there are still 199 other cold viruses out there that could give me the cold. And so in the future, I'll probably get exposed to one of those, I'll get the cold again. But now there's only 198 left. And so this explains why we see that kids seem to get the cold all the time. But once we're adults, we don't get colds as often. We still do. There's a lot of viruses to get exposed to. But once we've seen a bunch, it's less likely we will get one again. All right, the other thing I want to use this information to point out is how the cold is related to a couple other upper respiratory tract infections. So we know the cold infects the nose, it causes inflammation in the nose. One of the problems with the cold is it can cause a secondary infection called sinusitis. So our nose and our sinuses are connected by a bunch of small channels. And unfortunately, the inflammation in our nose caused by the cold can actually clog the little channels that connect our nose to our sinuses. When that happens, the mucus that our sinuses naturally produce has no way to drain out. That mucus then accumulates inside of our sinuses. That can create pressure and the sensations we experience with sinusitis. And then the bacteria that naturally live in our sinuses overgrow in that mucus, and we'll get an immune response to that overgrowth, including inflammation, perhaps some pus and things like that. So sinusitis is caused by inflammation from the cold that traps the mucus in the sinuses. Our endogenous microbes overgrow, and we've got sinusitis. So I really love this connection because it demonstrates the secondary infection nature of sinusitis. Can't get sinusitis without the cold first. If we prevent the cold, we can often prevent sinusitis. The same is true for another infection of the upper respiratory tract, which is called otitis media. This is an ear infection. So our ears are connected to our respiratory tract. Once again, there's a small channel, the eustachian tube, that connects our middle ear to the rest of our respiratory tract. If you have a cold, the inflammation caused by the cold can cause the eustachian tube to swell shut. That will trap fluid in the middle ear. The natural microbes that live in the middle ear will overgrow in that fluid. You'll get a bunch of pressure and additional inflammation from the immune response, and that's what can lead to the pain associated with an ear infection. So once again, Otitis media is caused by the inflammation from the cold, trapping the mucus in the middle ear, and then our endogenous microbes overgrow. So one primary infection, rhinitis, can lead to two different secondary infections, sinusitis and otitis media, for one specific reason, right? Inflammation of the cold causes some small channels in our respiratory tract to swell shut. That traps fluid either in the sinuses or in the middle ear. That fluid is the perfect growth media for the microbes that live there already. They overgrow because there's more habitat for them, and then that's what causes the infection. So I think that's all I wanted to say about these three infections of the upper respiratory tract from this infographic. Let me know if you have any questions.